Welcome to the Nate KG Podcast, a show dedicated to exploring the nuances of jump rope, where I talk with jumpers of all skill levels, backgrounds, and fitness goals. I've got some great news, guys. Kaylee and Nick Woodard are back on the podcast, and they absolutely deliver on this episode. If you haven't heard our first conversation, you should definitely go check that out. And just as a quick reminder, in case you're not familiar with Kaylee and Nick, they are both world champions many times over. Kaylee has been jumping for 22 years, has a degree in kinesiology, a master's in exercise science, and a PhD in motor behavior and sport psychology. Nick's been jumping for over 26 years and has earned 4 Double Dutch Contest world titles, 5 national championship titles, and 14 world championship titles. He's also traveled to 30 U.S. states and has been to 16 countries across 5 continents. Today we talk about the growth of recreational jump rope, how becoming an Olympic sport will help jump rope, maintaining our core values as the sport grows, how to stay motivated when jumping by yourself, and a whole lot more. All the show notes for this episode can be found over at natekg.com. And now, please enjoy this amazing conversation with Kaylee and Nick Woodard. All right, Kaylee and Nick, welcome back to the podcast. It's good to have you back.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, it's good to be back.
Yeah, we're gonna have a lot of fun. Let's just jump straight into it. Let's go down the route because we were chatting a little bit beforehand. Because you guys just hosted a beginner, intermediate, and then an advanced Zoom workshop this weekend, which has gone very well. And I want to go down the route of coaching because, as we were chatting beforehand, just because you're talented at a skill doesn't necessarily translate to talent in the realm of coaching. And Kaylee, if you want to take the lead on this, because you brought up a really good point about in the competitive space, how many people who coach are moms and dads of the sport. I want to know what your opinion is, both of you guys, but I think Kaylee, it makes sense for you to take the lead on this. What your opinions are on creating good quality long-term coaches in the sport.
Yeah, sure. So I do think that there are two kind of facets to this question. You brought up the point that, a lot of the current coaches are either moms and dads. I mean, that was my experience. My first coach was a PE teacher, but then my mom took over shortly after I joined the team. And so she kind of learned as she went, ended up being an awesome coach. But, nevertheless, she, started as a mom. And so I think that's the case. We've got a lot of PE teachers and a lot of moms and dads. And I think that is awesome. But the more that we can get coaching curriculums out there, coach training materials, just really start to beef up the education of our coaches, we're going to see better athletes. We're going to see less injuries, things like that, right? But also what we see, the other facet to this, we see this whole world of jump rope enthusiasts that is kind of, popping up. A lot of it's on social media and it's being spread that way. And so we're getting this whole crop of people that are, early 20s, early 30s, even into their 40s, and they are starting to jump and they're actually really good. And a lot of really solid fitness backgrounds, right? Like we've got CrossFit coaches out there that are taking up jump rope, fitness enthusiasts, things like that. And so I think we're going to also start seeing a really cool trajectory where these types of people who have knowledge of exercise physiology and coaching, background in other sports are now potentially going to start coaching and teaching our sport, whether it's on a fitness level or whether they want to start their own teams or whatever that might be. And so I'm excited to see that because I think that it's going to just it's going to make our sport more well-rounded, and we're going to start to see some new coaching avenues pop up and maybe higher quality coaches.
Mm-hmm. Nick, is there anything you want to add to that, or are you good with that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, if you think about any other sports, football, basketball, those things, the coaches that you have there are, moms and dads, but those moms and dads also were exposed to it at some point, whether they played it or something like that. So, going off of what Kaylee said, same thing. Now that we're getting more people exposed to it, especially through social media, stuff like that, these new coaches, these new jump rope enthusiasts are now going to be, another avenue for us to tap into and say, hey, do you want to teach? Or, hey, can you work with this team? Because now they understand it. And it's not like, well, I don't know what I'm doing. They actually know now. So which I think is an awesome thing for our sport.
Yeah, it really feels like we're seeing. I feel, in my perspective, we have the competitive or the sport, or sorry, the competitive piece of the sport pretty developed at this point, and that's what you guys have grown up with. It's what I've grown up in terms of jump rope, and I feel like now, because of a lot of external factors, we're starting to see the recreational piece of our sport mature. It's not matured yet, but I feel like what we're seeing is, like you pointed out with basketball, football, there's an entire recreational league that supports the entire sport. And I feel like that's kind of what we're seeing happen now, because like Kaylee, like you said, we have people in their 20s all the way up to their 60s and 70s picking up jump ropes and finding some way to use it effectively for their fitness.
Yeah, we think that's awesome because that's what we want. We want more people picking up a rope. We want more people jumping, just engaging in the sport that we love so much. And then I think with that, as they're picking it up, hopefully that will also, go down to like the recreation leagues, so when it comes to like, youth football, youth basketball, now we can potentially start having, a youth jump rope league in certain cities. And then now it becomes a thing where, they have a small season, maybe it's 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 10 weeks, but now they get a chance to compete 3, 4, 5 times within their little bitty season. So they get a taste of it. And then when they're done, if they want more, maybe they go find a bigger team, a Comet Skippers, a Hot Dog USA. They go find one of those. But if not, they touched it for a while, they can go try something else. And then when it comes back to October, November, it's jump rope season again, and you get back into that. So I'm hoping that on the recreation level, our sport gets there.
Yeah. And along those lines, Nick and I talk about this all the time, and you touched on it, Nate. Our sport, the high level competitive side of it has been pretty well developed. Do we have, ways to go? Yes, absolutely. But that's the most well developed aspect of our sport right now is the national and world championships. And so because of that, our sport is extremely top heavy, right? Like it's almost, I look at it like an upside down pyramid, whereas we need to be a right side up pyramid. And so the top levels of our sport have, that's where the most population is, right? That's the most dense population. That's where we put most of our efforts. But if we can shift our focus, right, and still do the top level stuff, but shift our focus to build up our bottom level and our grassroots efforts, then that will in turn filter into creating better athletes and better competitive environments for our top level. So we just need to do some work at the bottom level, the grassroots, and the recreation side of things.
Let's stick on this, and I really want to pull this. I'm gonna name it an issue. It's not really an issue, but like I'm gonna pull this topic apart because I've been thinking about this a lot. Obviously, watching what's happening in there and thinking about things in terms of what do other sports do in recreation and all this. In order to accomplish, Nick, what you were saying about these youth leagues, or I mean, I guess you could really extend that even to adult leagues as well, the same way adults will have tournaments and stuff in other sports. What does it, I guess the question is, what does it take to get there? And I'm assuming that the first answer is obviously numbers, people to do it. But what, in your guys' opinion, do you think helps or are the actions to take to build that up?
The biggest thing is honestly having a plan. I think with our
such a great answer. Oh my gosh.
I mean, so I think, with our sport, Kaylee said it earlier, we've been very top heavy, elite heavy. So when we think about a tournament, we go into, a YMCA and say, we need to do a tournament. We're going to have freestyle. We're going to have TJs and backflip. And they're like, we don't understand, And so I think, having a plan to fit the recreation level is what we need first. Going in there, figuring out what events are going to work for this new age or this new population of jumpers, how long we want that to be, an hour, 2 hours tops, something quick and easy and fun and engaging. Like we need that. And then, like you said, we need numbers, but the numbers I'm thinking of isn't the number of participants per se. It's more of the teachers, because you're going to need people to actually to make sure that they can teach the elements of what's actually going to happen. Now, that can be one or two things. You can have a company like us learn the ropes, where we go in and we hire the teachers and we kind of train them and we spread them out to make sure things are done right. Or, if it's a YMCA and they already have a staff and they're already teaching classes, we come in, or somebody can come in and teach them and say, here are the events that we need. Here's the structure that it goes. And so now whenever they get to their classes, they can now teach it themselves and run their own little tournament. But the biggest thing is you have to have a plan going in and saying, over the next 6 to 8 weeks, here's how you're going to get there and here's how it's going to end. Because right now, whenever, jumpers have done classes, there's never something to shoot for. We go in, we do a 4-week class, and then that's it. We go in, we do a 6-week class, and then that's it. So the kids, the first 2 weeks, they're excited. Like, yeah, I'm going to learn to cross. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And then they're like, well, what am I doing this for? They're like, oh, yeah, just wait till week 3. Well, wait till week 6. Well, for what? They have no idea. So that plan even goes to the kids. If they know what they're shooting for, now they have a purpose of learning the cross. Now they have a purpose of learning speed step. So the biggest thing, having a plan and finding, a staff or being able to teach others how to teach the events of what's going to end up happening.
So it really is top-down education. That makes a lot of sense. That it not necessarily going out and performing and showing, but rather putting systems in place in order to educate the most amount of people in the quickest amount of time with the greatest information. That makes sense. So go ahead.
And really quick, I was going to say to that, for our sport for years, we go in, we do shows, we do performances, and those are great. Those are great ways to get hundreds of kids, maybe even thousands of kids to look at you and say, oh my gosh, that's cool. But the question is, what's next? So
what are we going to do with that attention?
Exactly. So that's, it goes back to the plan. Once you have the attention of the whole school, it's like, okay, now over the next 6 weeks, here's what you should do. Easier said than done. I'm not saying, when you walk in, you can do this right away. But like if you go in being very intentional, saying, I'm going to come teach you, but I would love for you to get your kids here. Now you can start talking to PE teachers and administrators in a different way. And it's not just a show. You're trying to build a program now.
Right. Absolutely. And one more point that I was going to add to that. A lot of times I think as a sport and as jump rope athletes, we've been under the impression that, we have to be the ones to teach our sport. And, if you're not a jump rope athlete, then how in the world would you know how to teach our sport? And what Nick and I have seen with our business, like that's not true. A lot of different people with a lot of different backgrounds can be trained to teach jump rope and even to teach jump rope in a competitive way. It doesn't take a rocket scientist, right, to teach skiers and belts. It just takes someone who's really great with kids and who's willing to learn the basics. And so just expanding our horizons is going to be really necessary for our sport to grow.
Yeah, and I think we were talking before, and a great example of that thesis is Deanna from San Francisco and Chris Walker from the UK, because Deanna has the coaching background and she's applied all of her talent in a way that actually does translate into teaching others. And then someone like Chris Walker, like he spent an entire week with me, 8 hours in the gym going through every single thing I know. And because he's such an intelligent guy, he actually was able to pick it up and has now translated that into his own training and his own fitness training. So that totally makes sense. I kind of want to touch on the planning thing, like you said, Nick. I feel like that plan, in my mind, I've always kind of viewed the efforts of jump rope at large, not individual people, but just at large, the way we approach things, as extremely altruistic, because we want things to work out well. And I think that, I'll just speak personally, I've always felt like that means if I'm going to be altruistic, that means I must exclude any kind of a business mindset or viewing anything I do as a product, because I want this to be a gift. But that was in the past. Now, as I've grown, I'm realizing, wait a minute, if we take this approach of whatever I'm teaching or learning or sharing or giving, if I view it as the same as a physical product, it's just not, you can't actually physically hold it. But if I look at like, oh, I can package this up and have this business approach, I feel like that is something that you guys are doing that other people could use to their benefit, to actually simplify things, plan things, and more effectively communicate, because when you view it as like through this business lens, I think that helps a lot in terms of getting to the end result, which is actual users. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I love that point. I love that question because I think it is something that's in the back of our heads a lot, right? And because you're right, it's our culture as jumpers that, hey, this is a gift. Like, we want to share it with as many people as possible for apps for free, and we do. Like, that is absolutely true, and we should want that. However, it's also, there's a fine line. Like, it's not wrong or bad to have a business mindset and to view the skill that we've all put 20, 30 years into perfecting. It's not bad to view that as a product, right? That can be useful and can be sold to people in a good way. And I think the way that I like to think about it is that if you truly package it like a business, right, and you treat it like a business, then it enables you to create a better product and to help people even more.
Yep.
Whereas it's always, if it's always volunteer and it's always that, it's not that you can't create a good product, but there's only so far that your time can go, because at the end of the day, you've got to make a living to eat, right? And to take care of your family. And so, I just like to look at it through that lens, is that I'm still helping people, right? We're still in the business of helping people, but in order to make it sustainable, you got to have at least some sort of a business mindset with it.
Yeah. And I think that I was talking with Max from Burning Labs Ropes in Panama the other day offline, and we were just chatting about this whole idea. And I think that where people get caught up and don't execute on the idea of viewing as a business is that they don't pull apart these layers, which is like there's free information, and then there's like a paid program, and then there's like access as a coach. And I think the more you use that business mindset and you pull apart the individual nuances, the more you realize, like, at least this is something that I've really come to drill into my head the past 6-8 months, is that I can put out 5, high quality tutorials, whatever, on YouTube every week, plus podcasts, plus in all this stuff, right? And I can do that, and it can all be for free, and I can still have something that's valuable in other places because I go about it in a way that actually makes sense for people. And you still can give tremendously and have something that's worth being paid for. I kind of want to. There's more to go through on this. Where do you guys think we are right now with these goals? I know you two are putting in a tremendous amount of work. Where do you think we are as a sport with the goals of educating more and helping to develop the recreational side of things?
I mean, honestly, I would say that we're still like on the ground level with it, because there just hasn't been a lot of effort on an organizational perspective to actually get these things out there. I think others who have taken it upon themselves to create their own businesses and tried to do programs for communities, things like that, like those individuals or those companies are starting to kind of break through a little bit more. But as a sport as a whole, I don't think we just haven't concentrated on it. And so I think we're really on the ground levels of it, and we really need to find a plan, get a working group around it and try to push it the best we can. And we're not going to hit everything at once. Like, it might start in 1 or 2 communities to see how it builds up. And then you take that model, then you go somewhere else, and then you go somewhere else. So we're talking, 5, 6, 10 years down the road before it truly starts seeing what we're looking for. And even at that point, the sport itself might not even see the benefits of it for another 12 years. Because if we're doing our job right, we're catching these kids when they're 7 and 8 years old, and they're, slowly but surely starting to learn about it. And then when they want more, which will probably be when they're 13, 14, then they might go find a team. And when they go find a team, hopefully, 4 or 5 years later on, now they're, to the top of their game. So once again, it's a building block, and we just need to do our part as a sport, as organizations, to make sure that we are putting together a plan and slowly but surely just trying things. Because if we don't try and we stay with our elite athletes, they will get better. That's going to happen. We'll take care of them. But we definitely have to take care of this recreation group and get things going, because that's where our future is, and that's how our sport's going to continue to grow.
Yeah, and it's like a business mindset again. If we as organizations, jump rope organizations, only do what is going to yield immediate benefits for us right now, we're not going to grow. We've got to have a future mindset. We've got to have a long-term mindset, and that takes so much discipline. But if we don't, then we're, what Nick said, we're never going to grow past where we are right now.
Yeah, and so this is just a story that kind of goes on along the same lines. A few years ago, we were watching what's that? The dance show?
Dance Moms?
No.
I love that Dance Moms was the first one, though. That was a really great thing to have in there.
Entertaining.
So You Think You Can Dance.
Oh yeah.
And they had a kids version, and this was like 4 or 5 years ago. And we were watching the tryouts, and Kaylee was like, "Oh my gosh! Like, look at that girl. She's 8 years old. Why is her toes pointed like that? Like
they're just perfect."
Yeah, she looks like she's a professional dancer, but she's 8 years old. Like, why don't we have that in our sport? I said,
like, we can't even get 8-year-olds to do skiers. Like, it's just ridiculous.
You know? And so I said, well, the reason you're seeing that is because I'm going to make this up. It was the Chicago edition. You know, in Chicago, she is one of 20,000 8-year-old dancers. And so that's what you're seeing, the product of recreation programs and things like that. And that, what we see on TV is one of 20,000 kids. In our sport right now, we have 5,000 in the U.S., I'm going to make that up, that are jumping at a competitive level. But there's no reason why we can't have 5,000, 6,000, 10,000 people jumping in Bowling Green, Kentucky. And then from that, we can see this we can create 15 more Kayleys right here in Bowling Green if we had 20,000 people to pick from. But when as a sport, we only have roughly, we'll say 10,000 across the world, it's very hard to find those other individuals who are going to be breaking out all the time. So we just have to do a better job of really creating that bottom market. And, when we talked about that story a little while ago, that just kind of brought that up for what we're talking about now.
Yeah, I first of all, I love these kinds of big picture discussions. This is like so much fun. But in terms of, there's just so much to keep going with. So first of all, I think it's very much worth pointing out that between the two of you, there are many decades of involvement in the sport, and that's decades, not just years, right? And you're looking down the pipeline at another minimum decade of legitimate effort of working on and helping towards the sport. And I think that with so much of what we see on social media now, the platform, most of the platforms that exist typically help cultivate more of a quick transaction or just a faster interaction. The comment section of Instagram or Facebook, while you can have a long form discussion, doesn't really foster that. And it's just interesting to hear how, as two amazingly influential people in the sport, like this is not just, oh, let's hang out and I'm jumping and check me out and get some followers. This is like, there's legitimately like a mission and a deep culture that exists here and is going to grow very, very large. Which might seem like a weird side tangent, but I think that it's very much worth bringing up and discussing, especially considering the current state of how we see folks who are just picking up jump ropes for the first time and they blast off to 10, 20, 30,000 followers, right? Which is less so of a complaint and more so of a, let's actually look at the state of how things are and how that can be used for jump rope, But anyway, that's a whole other tangent. I do want to discuss on this topic of long-term recreational development, both in youth and adult, and looking down the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years of growth in the sport. I think we may have touched on this last time, but I apologize, I do forget. Did we discuss where the Olympics fits with this? Because I really would like to get your opinion on, as two extraordinarily elite athletes, I really want to know where you think the endeavor to make jump rope an Olympic sport, where that fits within, or I guess your opinion on where you think it should fit in our priorities as a sport.
Sure. So we first off, yeah, it's a great question. First off, we did not talk about that, but
okay.
Yes, I love going into that. So I think when it comes to the Olympics, that is a very amazing goal for any sport, especially our sport. And but I would say that it should be a goal, but it shouldn't be just the primary goal. And I put it to you like this: if you think about soccer, what's their premier event?
Right, the World Cup.
Exactly. It's not the Olympics. You know what I mean? The Olympics is a byproduct of them doing everything right, and they're like, you know what? We want to have soccer too. But the World Cup is their biggest event. So for jump rope, we can kind of do the same thing. Like, yes, every 4 years the Olympics happen, and if we do everything right, which we are working
from an organizational standpoint.
From an organizational standpoint, if we do everything right from an organizational standpoint, the Olympics will be a byproduct of us doing things right for us to get there. But our world championships that, will be hosted, every year or every other year, whatever IJRU decides to do, then, hopefully that is one of our biggest watched events that everybody's like, oh my gosh, here's what you want to watch these athletes from Germany and, all these places, because that's what you want to watch. So when it comes to the Olympics, though, we're getting there. I will say
for the first time, like honestly, Nick and I have been in the sport for over 20 years. And for the first time, we are actually taking steps.
Yeah, it's steps are being taken. I've been in the room or, on some of these trips to just kind of see how things are working. And it's a process, but it's a process that like, you can't cut corners. You have to, kind of, I won't say follow the rule book, but you kind of have to follow the rule book and setting up your organization in a way that is going to make the Olympics start to look at you. Mm-hmm. And, I believe Sean Hamilton, which we all know and love, he started this quest 10 or so years ago. And, when he built World Jump Rope, that was the goal. The goal was to, build an event that was just very successful. But then once the event started to be successful, then it was the organizational practices behind it that's going to, make sure that we are governing the right way, that the Olympics or the IOC is going to be like, oh, what are they doing? And so then that transitioned over to IJRU. And so for the first time in our sports history, our sport is actually recognized. We always say that we're going to the Olympics. We've always said we're going to do this, but our sport has never been recognized. And for the first time, literally the first time ever, our sport is actually recognized by SportAccord, which is affiliated with the IOC. So like that's never happened in the sports history. And it's good to say we are on our way. How long will it take? I couldn't give you an answer there, but we are on the path for the first time in over 40 years.
Yeah. And it's just, it is so cool, like to think about that. And to think, growing up in this sport and how many hours and how much effort you put into the sport to be great and to be your best. Now we're going to see at some point soon, we're going to see a generation of jumpers who grow up and from the time they're 6 years old, they're in the gym all day, every day, jumping rope, and they're going to be able to represent their country at the highest sporting event in the whole world. And like, that is really, really cool to think about for our sport.
Yeah, that's, man, there's so much good stuff there. So do you guys know some of some or all of the details, probably some, of how to actually engage in becoming an Olympic sport? Because I personally have literally no idea, other than like a certain amount of countries need to be, involved. But what are some of the background things that do need to happen for a sport in order to get into the realm of consideration or potentially even become an Olympic sport?
Sure. I mean, I honestly don't know a lot of them. You're right. When it comes to the number of countries, I believe that magic number is like 40.
Yeah, so, 40 that are recognized in their country by their country's highest sporting authority.
Yeah. So okay. Whatever that is in the U.S., that would be the USOC, right? So whatever that is in your different countries, that would be it. I think there's a number of now I got my words messed up. The like AAU, which is a multi-sport organization. How many multi-sport organizations are you a part of worldwide?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So our sport is, a part of some of those.
There's also, isn't there something with the rules? Like you have to have consistent international competition rules for about 10 years or something like that.
There's stuff like, there's some stipulation there. Don't quote us on the actual.
Please don't quote us.
Like length of that. We don't know. I do know that, I'm trying to think. There's different levels. So like, we are, the sport itself is an observatory member with Sport Accord, and then from Sport Accord, there's things called aims. There's things called, oh gosh, there's all these just different benchmarks, and then once you are, I forgot the one that's right underneath the IOC, but once you're a part of this last little organization, which meant you hit all these other benchmarks, then the IOC is like, oh, now I see you. We are now ready to open you up to the game.
Right, like you're now eligible.
Yeah, so
Gotcha.
there's so much that I don't know. Sean knows all of it because like he's the one who's driving the ship right now, and
yeah, he could talk to you for like an hour on just that.
Nice. So then, what then becomes the benefit of becoming an Olympic sport? Because from my own perspective, for me, there's a pride element, which is I participate in a sport that is an Olympic sport, right? And also we know as jump ropers that from an athletic standpoint, it's more than worthy of being there. But what other benefits are there of becoming an Olympic sport?
So one benefit is definitely funding. Once you are an Olympic sport, once you're, a part of these huge international organizations and once in the U.S., we're recognized by the USOC, for example, funding starts becoming more available for the grassroots level, and people at those higher levels in just the broader sporting community start viewing our sport as legitimate. And once that happens, again, the funding starts to become available for us to grow our sport at the levels that we have been talking about, this entire time with the recreation competitions and just on up. And so, just the kind of the legitimizing, if that's even a word, of our sport is huge.
Yeah. And then I just think, as the Olympics being one of the biggest events in the world, just the exposure, right?
Yeah.
So you see, if you see jump rope on there and it's done at a high level and you're engaged in this, as a athlete or as a young kid, you're going to be like, oh my gosh, what is that? Mm-hmm. And that might be something that you want to take part in. I'm pretty sure there was a lot of kids who saw Simone Biles, doing gymnastics, like, I now want to go do gymnastics. Or I forgot the other girl from the U.S. Her name was Simone as well, but she was a swimmer and won, I think, the 100-meter freestyle or whatever. And people were like, I now want to go swim. So I think jump rope can have that same impact. If we're on a stage that big and things are going well, I can now see people being like, I want to go jump rope. How do I do that? But once again, we need the funding, we need the plan, we need the people.
Yep.
All those things.
And I'll put it this way too, and this is such a silly example to compare it to, but when the Jump movie came out on Disney, mm-hmm. Was it Jump In? Jump In, yeah, on Disney. We talk about that all the time now because we're like, we had such an opportunity as a sport, and in the U.S. as a sport, we had such an opportunity to gain just more athletes, right, and gain exposure. Mm-hmm. We had exposure, and we could have capitalized on it so well, and really started to develop these grassroots efforts and all of these things that we're talking about. But we probably didn't do the job that I won't even say probably. We did not capitalize on it the way that we should have. And just imagine, that was a little Disney Channel movie that aired in the U.S. maybe only. But imagine if we saw that type of interest come from that movie. Imagine the interest when our sport is displayed on an international stage at the Olympics and how we could capitalize on that exposure and just send our sport to the next level.
Yeah, see, this is the conversation that I've been looking for a long time. So I appreciate you guys going down this with me because I've had this question for a while and it wasn't lining up for me as to why this would make sense. But this whole discussion about balancing recreational with, high level Olympic pursuits and all these different benefits and how all of this is what comes together to really paint the picture of an entire sport. This really does make a lot of sense. As we move forward and we are growing and we achieve becoming an Olympic sport and we achieve having a solid and growing recreational youth program, recreational adult program, we have different competitions popping up. I'm sure there will be more. And when this happens, we get obviously a much larger sample size of humans in the sport. What are your guys' thoughts on how we can protect or maintain our core values? Because the way I see it, we have altruism, collaboration, and kindness as like fundamentally the three things that all jump ropers believe in. What are your thoughts on how we maintain that and keep that front of mind in our culture?
I mean, me personally, I think the way that we keep that like front of mind is that we always produce that with the way that we teach, the way that we interact with people. I think if people feel that, then they'll know like, oh, this is what is expected of me when I'm now doing a show or when I'm now teaching other people. So if we, as the older jumpers in this sport, or even the coaches, whatever it is, as long as, in my opinion, as long as we keep interacting in that way, people are going to look at us or look at the way that we've done things over the years to say, we need to keep this true. Is it going to be perfect? Is it going to happen all the time? No. But I think if we can at least try to set that model, I think that we're going to set our sport up for future generations to say, I want to be a part of that. I want to be a part of this culture. I want to be able to give back. I want to be able to do all of those things. And don't get me wrong, I feel like you see it in other sports, but like you said, jump rope, like I feel like that's a very unique. Like you're not going to see another individual before they go out. I'm going to help you with your frog, right, and I'm going to go out on the floor because I'm competing against you to cheer you on, to hope that you make the trick that I helped you with, and then we're going to see what happens. Like you don't see that in other sports all the time. And so I feel like that's very unique with our sport. And the more that we keep that going, I think it'll continue to carry on for a long time, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think it takes really, really intentional culture development, and that's something that, I mean, in sports psych and kind of the field that I'm in, we talk about that a lot, and it takes intentional effort. It takes intentional and very strong leadership. It also takes just, I keep using the word intentional, but things like highlighting athletes that are displaying those qualities, even on an international stage, like highlighting them, talking about them, putting them out as an example for the younger kids. And just, once you let it slip, that's when it's very easy to go down that slippery slope and just kind of have the sport's values disintegrate. But if you never let it slip the first time, and if we are really diligent about keeping it going from right now, on forward, I think that we'll be okay. And I will say that we have to also be aware of, we can't be naive to the fact that once more money is introduced into the sport, and once people are perhaps even competing for money and things like that, we cannot be naive to the fact that, yes, that will bring about some challenges with maintaining our integrity. It's going to, because money does that. Is it a bad thing? Am I saying that we shouldn't be competing for money, or that, we should avoid all financial benefit of our sport or anything like that? Absolutely not. I mean, we've talked about making our sport into more of a business already, but at the same time, we can't be naive to the dangers of that, and we have to just be proactive in our leadership to keep our values strong.
Yeah, see, that's literally what I was going to ask you guys next was, how to to me it seems like an influx of financial gains or the attention gains, those two would be some of the more detrimental factors that would come about from growing. To me, because as you were speaking about that, as I was thinking this, I'm like, okay, well, what do we do to mitigate that? And you were talking about very intentional efforts. Now, I really want to kind of explore this, but to me, one of the, I guess, easiest, or let's go with simplest, because easy is not the right word, but one of the simplest paths to maintain that, in my mind, would be to utilize the current the current social media platforms and the way the game is being played right now, which in my mind translated would be for people like you two to position, I mean, as you're already doing, but like to go after a high level of followers, and a high level of attention, which are, those two things are not necessarily exactly the same, but for thought leaders and for people who hold those values true and I mean will not be corrupt by more attention or more money in the future from a sport growth perspective, or any perspective. I feel like people like you guys being put up really high in that regard and having the attention and the awareness in the sport as a whole, not just competitive, but as a whole. I feel like that is one of the top tactics that I think could be taken to help protect against that. Because if someone gets into jump rope and the first thing they see is you guys talking about jump rope, and then it's this conversation of, guys, I know you can go out and you can win 10 grand at a competition, but that's not as important as having value outside of the money, which is X, Y, or Z, or whatever that would actually end up being. But like, to me, that seems like a good way to go. What are your thoughts on that tactic or other tactics that could be taken to actually protect against this in the future? Because I feel like now is the time to start this discussion, to start figuring it out, because I mean, it's happening no matter what, right? So
I agree with you. I think putting influential role models, on the forefront, and making sure that those messages are heard by those influential role models, like, people that kids will still listen to. I think that is definitely important. And I think we have a lot of individuals like that in our community right now who could speak on those topics and who are very respected. And so, yeah, I think that's a great tactic. I also think that, I'm trying to think of how to word this. I think that our sport has done a really good job, at least in my experience. My coaches, my staff leaders as I was growing up, Sean Hamilton, I'll bring him up again because he was so influential. He was, our staff leader for several of the first times I was on camp staff. And he, along with several other individuals, just did a really good job of hammering into our brains that this thing called jump rope is bigger than us. And so that's always been something that shaped the way that I thought about the sport, and shaped the way that I think a lot of people in our generations think about the sport, is that the reason that we are in it, the reason that it's so important to us, is not because it's good for us. It's because it's bigger than us, right? And because we have this opportunity and this responsibility of being a role model, right? Like, once you kind of make your way up through the ranks of the sport, you are a role model whether you want to be or not. And so when those things and just the magnitude of the fact that you are influencing so many younger lives, when that really sinks in, not for everybody, but for most people, when that really sinks in, I think it transforms the way that you act, and it transforms the way that you think, and it makes the attention and the money or whatever is possible, it makes it less important. And it just drives home the fact that influencing young lives in a positive way is more important than the selfish gain of money or whatever.
Mm-hmm. That is such a big deal, because we even see that even within the adult recreational adult enthusiast community of jumpers now, where because as you get older, there's a lot of other considerations that come into play when it comes to picking up a new sport or activity. But like you're saying, really understanding that what we're doing is not about you or me or ourselves. It's about all of us together. And I think that is a very, very important point. Let's backtrack about 20 minutes, because we were talking about coaches and how, to systemize things, plan things, go into the YMCA or these different, local places and help teach, people who are already in that situation, teach them how to jump rope and spread this. At a low level, like you were saying, a lot of skills you do not need any particular skill to teach the lower level ones. How do you guys approach coaching other coaches? What is kind of your mentality about? I mean, we've talked about why, but what do you think about how? How do you feel is the best way to approach that?
Now, when you say coaching other coaches, are we talking about current jump rope coaches that are in the sport and how we go about talking to them or working with them, or like somebody that we want to potentially bring on to be a part of our recreation classes.
Let's do all the above. Let's look at how you guys would approach teaching another competitive jump roper. Let's say for an exact example, let's look at like in a workshop setting, right? To help cultivate someone to be able to thrive in a workshop setting as one of the leaders. But let's also look at how you would bring on, let's say, like a new employee, if you were to bring someone on like in-house as one of the learning the ropes coaches. And then also as a third tangent, how you would coach someone like at the YMCA to know how to jump and to spread that to the youth that they're working with.
Sure. So I think like when it comes to a workshop setting, and we're talking to, these young athletes, teenagers, young adults as well, when it comes to like, coaching them and getting them ready to go out there and
be staff,
be a staff, I think it's just giving them the encouragement that like they are here for a reason, and their reasons to make the experience of every jumper out there the best that it could be. Because at one point we were all them. Like I remember Sean telling me, and when I was a staff member and Sean was my staffer, he was like, at one point you were looking up to somebody else. And that was either their first experience, that could have been their second experience, but you want to make sure that it was their best experience and you remember those individuals. So make sure when you go out there, you're giving them a memorable experience. You're breaking things down. You're engaging with them. You're doing all these things. So with the staffers, we try to do a good job of preaching that message, and then also giving them the tools to say, like, when you are teaching certain skills, really, really, really break it down and make sure that you're trying to do it in several different ways. Because sometimes when you're teaching a kid, you're going to have that one kid in there who can do everything, right?
Yeah.
And then you're like, so then it's like, well, how do I pay attention to them, but then give everybody else attention? So we give those tools as well as saying, have 3 or 4 or 5 tricks in your pocket right around that trick, so you can keep that person going while you're still working with everybody else. So we try to give all of those tools to those, those new staffers, those staffers who've been there for a long time, and just hoping that the words that we're preaching out are going to resonate with them for the 6 hours that we have them, so that they can work with everybody else. What would you say about the
Actually, I want to jump in here just for a second, because I want to add something with just for clarification for those who might not be familiar with the standard competitive jump rope workshop. The breakout of learning typically involves one staff member to usually, what would you guys say, like 4 to 6 jumpers ideally, depending on the workshop. And so that's the scenario that Nick is talking about in terms of you might have one out of those 4 to 6 that is just absolutely crushing it, and the others are still working on the first skill, because people learn at different levels and speeds. But one other thing that I want to add too is for when you, to your point about having this philosophy or really hyping up the staff members and saying like, you deserve to be here. From my perspective, when you invited me up to go teach at the hot dog workshop a lot of years ago, hearing that from you, I now that you're saying it, it's jogging my memory. Like, yeah, you did say that, and that all made me feel not only really great, but that really motivated me to do the best I possibly could in that scenario. So that's just, so that's a big thank you and a big confirmation that the way you do that works really well.
Awesome. No, I appreciate it. Did you want to touch on the instructors?
For learning the ropes.
Yeah.
So you asked about how we go about training instructors, maybe for recreational classes or people that are maybe outside of the traditional jump rope competitive community. And so what we've done in the past, and there are several ways to do this, but what we've done in the past was we were in a university setting. I was teaching some PE classes for the university. So like, exercise and nutrition and things like that. And then eventually I started teaching, I developed a jump rope class and started teaching collegiate students there. And so what we did was just pull from those students, and we didn't necessarily pull the ones that were the best at jump rope. We, just asked, and we pulled the ones that we felt were going to be really good with kids, right? Their demeanor maybe indicated that they would be really good with kids. They seemed to have good leadership qualities, things like that. And so we kind of looked for those types of individuals. And then we simply just started teaching them the basics of jump rope. And we taught them the basic skills from the perspective of like, hey, here's how you do it, but also here's how you teach it. And here are some contingency plans for like, if you have a kid who's struggling with X, Y, or Z, here's how you deal with that. We did a little bit of role playing, things like that, just to get them ready to send them out into, to lead their own classes. And then we also just tried to give them instructional support. So I know Nick always put together really great lesson plans for our instructors, and we reiterated to them over and over and over, like, this is your class. Here's your lesson plan, and we want you to try to touch on these things. However, with, 8-year-old kids, you can't dictate how that class is going to go. And
right.
so, make it to half of the lesson plan, but you had fun and the kids felt successful, then you did your job. Great job. You can go home at the end of the day feeling great. And so those types of things, we had as many trainings with them as possible. And I will say the success of the classes, we saw a direct correlation to how many trainings the instructors went to, right? So like we had some instructors that were very diligent. They came to all the trainings. They were, just great. And their classes went wonderfully. The, recreation leaders had great things to say, all these things. The ones that didn't come to trainings, of course, struggled. And so, that just tells us things that we need to work on, getting instructors to trainings. But then also it tells us that the training model seems to be effective, and working.
Yeah. And I think I would also say with those individuals, we also say that, like, when you're in these classes and, if you get through everything, great. But at the end of the day, you're the coach. If you tell them to jump on 2 feet and then, like, if you say something weird, they're not going to know if it's right or wrong.
Right. As long as the kids are safe and feeling successful.
Always come back to us the next day and say, I told them to do this. It wasn't working.
I told them to jump on their head.
Yeah, it wasn't working. So was I right? We can now correct you and say, okay, we see where you're going. This is what you were trying to say, and here's how you do it. So we try to give them the flexibility to say, if you say something wrong, it's okay. Nobody knows anything about what you're teaching right now because jump rope isn't the norm. It's not like we're trying to teach somebody how to do a free throw and then you're telling them to do it backwards. That's wrong. You know what I mean? But
right. Yeah.
In jump rope, nobody really has studied it the way that we have to know they really shouldn't be getting in on that count, should be on this count. But they're having fun. So I'm not going to correct you right now in front of them, but later on, let me help you out.
Yeah. And along those lines too, like that's a good principle for teaching anyone anything, right? If you make someone afraid to make a mistake, they're not going to perform as well for you. Almost 100% of the time. With people are afraid to make a mistake, they're going to make a mistake. And so if you give people the flexibility and the freedom to like, hey, you can make a mistake and you're still in a safe environment, we're still going to love you anyway, and help you through it, they're going to perform for you better in the long run.
Yeah, that's so much good stuff there. Like this whole episode is just like jam packed with amazingness. You guys are delivering hardcore. Let's kind of go down a different route and let's talk about actually training for competition. Because I do want to get into the specifics of how you guys trained. So when it comes to you guys training, let's compare two time periods of training for both of you. Let's look at one of your like most successful, what you were doing when you were training and you were your most successful at competition, and then what you were doing in training when you were not as successful. And I know that we'll have to kind of have some interpretation there based on, I mean, as the years go by, you naturally get better and better, but kind of accounting for the skill differences, let's kind of look at those. And let's start by, let's do the comparison second. I know this is a very large question. Let's do the comparison second and just start by talking about what you were doing from a very tactical perspective when you were competing and performing at your best.
I'll start with kind of a general, and we can definitely get more specific, but I don't want to forget to get this out. When I have performed at my best is when I have listened to my body and been disciplined to not jump when I know I shouldn't jump. And here's what I mean. when I've performed at my worst, and there have been several years where I have really not performed well at competition. And by that, I mean, the way that I kind of measure that is if I'm performing better in earlier practices than I do at competition, I look at that as, hey, something went wrong in training, right? Whether it's mental, physical, or both. And so when that's happened and I have been not at my best at competition, I think that I have been overtrained and that my body, like I wasn't listening to it. And I knew that I shouldn't be in the gym as much, you know, as I was gearing up for competition because I could feel my body breaking down, but I wasn't disciplined enough to take myself out of the gym. And, you know, I just kept hitting it and then didn't perform well. So that's the mistake I've made most commonly. And when I performed at my best, I at least did a better job of listening to my body and actually being disciplined to take myself out of the gym when I knew I should.
I wish I had like a button for air horns right now. Like, bah, 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 like that's such a really big, important, like what you just said right there. The discipline is not hammering your body over and over and over and over. I mean, there's discipline of showing up for sure, but like having discipline to not be there is like, oh my gosh, that is such a big deal.
Yeah, it is. And I think a lot of coaches maybe struggle with that too, because you have to know your athletes, right? For some athletes, the difficulty in discipline is showing up. You gotta help them become disciplined to work hard and show up for practice. For other athletes, it's the exact opposite, which is what we just talked about, right? Is the discipline of leaving. But yeah, I think that, and then I think also a general principle of specificity of practice. Early in the season, you need to train a little bit less specifically and do more just general strength, more general endurance, do your skill work, things like that, work on creativity, work on longer speeds and you know, things like that. But then as you get towards competition, making sure that you are practicing specifically so that you get in the gym, you do what you need to do. It's all very specific to practice. You make sure that you stretch and recover and then get out of the gym. So going from general to specific during the training cycle is another just general principle that has helped me in the better years.
Do you have any recommendations on like 1 to 3 books or resources to study periodization? Because I have a few books that I really enjoy, but I'm curious if there are 1 to 3 that might stick out that you think other people might be able to use as a resource for their own training.
You know what? That's a great question. Let me send some to you.
Okay, that's fine. And I can put it in the show notes.
Yeah, I don't know their names right off the bat, but I can send some to you.
Cool.
And I'm trying to think, like, for me, as far as like when I feel like I've performed my best, I mean, I think just like for a lot of other people, it's when I've been able to like truly run my routine multiple times before I got there. I mean, don't get me wrong, there have been plenty of years where the first time I got on the floor was the first time I actually performed that routine.
Don't tell people that.
How does that even work?
I don't know.
Nate, I don't even know.
Yeah. But okay, hold on a second. You can't go any further yet. I'm going to stop here for a second. How do you do that? And then were those routines still successful? Like, I guess like 80% completion rate? Like how did those routines go?
I mean, some of them ran great. Some of them were horrible. So, I mean, to give you an example that I can remember off the top of my head right now, 2009, maybe, like in Galveston, we came to nationals. It was me, Jeff, and I think CJ was our double Dutch partner at the time, but it was just us three. It wasn't a whole bunch from Razzmatazz. And I remember like that summer we practiced a lot on other things, but I really did not work on my freestyle a lot. Like I really didn't. And I literally got to nationals like not having ran my freestyle all the way through, nor did I truly know what I was going to do for my power section. Wasn't even a thought. And so like I got to the back and like me and Jeff were like, what's going to happen? So he's like, we'll try this. We'll try that. I was like, all right.
Kids don't listen.
And I know, right? And so like I had like a structure of what I wanted to do. I just didn't know the tricks and the order that I wanted to do it. So I was literally in the back, like trying to figure this thing out and make it up. And, you know, I went out and I think, I don't remember prelims, but I think prelims I had like a miss or so. So I ended up making it to finals, which was awesome. And then I think I polished it up getting ready for finals. And I think that was the year that Jeff had me put the moneymaker into my routine that year as well. And so I think that year like ended up with me winning my freestyle. So, I mean, does it happen that way all the time? Not at all. Do I suggest it? Not at all. But like those have been times where like I truly haven't worked on it and it worked out. But the times that like I feel like I performed my best, I was in the gym, a couple of days a week, really trying to get the sections of my routines put together the best way that I could, especially for my freestyle routine. And like Kaylee said, not doing them over and over and over and over and over. It's going there and saying, okay, look, I got, 5 times to get this the way that I want it, because I don't want to kill my body doing this so much. So yeah, the times that I've truly gotten in there and just kind of hammered down and spend my time specifically on certain areas is when I've actually performed my best. But there are those flukes, and I have had a few of them.
So when you were making that routine, or when you've done that in other scenarios, because I'm trying to like actually figure out how you could pull that off, because that's such a hard thing to do. Are you said you had sections that were in your head. Are you pulling from previous combinations or sequences that you've done? Like, are you pulling from other things? Or are you actually putting together like a brand new, not only a brand new set of, mostly set of skills, but are you actually changing the order in a way that you've never done before?
No, I could call you out so hard right now.
No, it's fine. To be honest with you, and if you watch my routine over the years, I've used the same structure of my routine. It's been multiples. I do a flip, I do power, and then I'll end with, when I was with USA Jump Rope, some footwork, and then some more multiples, and I would end it. So like my structure, for 15, 16 years really has not changed. Like there might have been one year where I did a little bit of power at the beginning, but for the most part, you're going to see multiples, flip, power, multiples, in. Like that's it. Mm-hmm. And so that structure.
Notice he did not say rope manipulation.
Oh yeah. Now I have to.
It's out of sight, out of mind for him.
I know. Now I do rope manipulation. It's a struggle. Nate, I can't cross. So I had that structure in my head. And then, when you do, as you know, as a jumper, we do tons of shows. So you always have like your show routine in the back of your head. So like my structure is my normal routine, but it's also my show routine. But now I'm at a competition. So what can I do more? So what tricks can I put now into this structure that I already have that's going to enhance what I'm already doing, that's going to make it that much harder? Does that mean it's going to win all the time? Not at all. It really doesn't. That was kind of how I flowed through that moment. I knew a structure. I knew some tricks that I could do well, but I knew that those tricks weren't going to hold up in competition. So how do I enhance those or build on that so I can make a true competition sequence? So that's kind of, in that moment, what happened there. But yeah, I'll be the first to tell you, I've kept my structure forever. Like I don't want to jump power first. I really don't. Like I feel like, and Kaylee, she laughs at me. I feel like I get more warmed up as I go through my routine. So that's why I want my power in the middle. If I had to start with power,
so bizarre.
Yeah, if I had to start with power, I'm not going to be on the floor ready enough to do that. But if you let me start with some multiples and then I could get into a little flip, by the time I get 20 or 30 seconds into it, I feel good. Now I can do power.
Yeah.
That actually makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
For me.
Yeah, for him. And said some jumpers are that way. I run out of ATP really quick. And so, we all do, honestly. But yeah, so I do my hardest stuff right off the bat very first. But I will say one thing that Nick does really, really well, and he's actually he's preached this to me and he's, tried to help me, and I'm really stubborn, but he is very smart about what he puts in his routine. He's not going to put a whole bunch of risky stuff. He'll usually have one or two, what would you say, like one or two things in there that are kind of risky, per sequence. But the majority of what he does, he is 100% sure that he can hit it. Like he knows he can hit it. Because he's done it so many times, that individual trick or that sequence or whatever it is. And so he does a really good job. That's another discipline thing that we could talk about. But I think that a lot of jumpers, myself included, we get ourselves into trouble because we just think that magically when we get to competition, we're going to have this magic ability to do things that we can only hit 3 out of every 10 times at practice, and that's just not the case.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. let's get really detailed on two fronts. Let's talk about, if it makes sense, to talk about the details of how you actually train at a jump rope practice, because I think that for a lot of coaches or for a lot of athletes, just everyone really, seeing the way you structure your sessions, I think will be very helpful. And then if there was some sort of cross training at a different point that was successful or beneficial, digging into that would be really cool as well.
So I'm trying to think, because I'm also trying to like put my coaching hat on when I was with Hot Dog USA and how we structure a lot of our practices. And I think it really went into phases, kind of like what Kaylee said earlier. So like, those first couple months, you're just kind of building, when I'm talking about routines at least, we're just building up tricks. We're just trying new things, trying to put different weird sequences together, and just so you can get used to like jumping again, and just kind of get into the competitive mode of it. And then when it came to competition, we are getting closer to competition. We started structuring our practice around sequences. So we would give our kids 10, 15 minutes to go work on this sequence. And this could be for single rope, this could be for double dutch or wheel, whatever it was, go work on this sequence. And so for, a month, maybe two, or a month or so, depending on how many practices we had in those weeks, we would just work on sequences, not really putting anything together as far as different sequences together, but just the individual sequences. And then we would start building on that and saying, okay, now let's layer two sequences together. So let's go, and every kid's different, so we can't tell them power to multiples, because that might not be their sequence. But, go from sequence 1 to sequence 2. That's all we want you to do. You got 15 minutes, go work on that. And so we kind of started building routines in that way. So by the time it got to competition, we had built sequence 1 through, we'll say 4, already all the way through. Was it perfect? Maybe not for this first competition that they were going to, but we've built it in a way that now your entire routine. You're not guessing, you know exactly what it is. Now you have to go perform to the best of your ability. Then once we got back from that competition, we now had our routine, we had a structure. So now our 15 minutes were like, okay, cool. Let's go and nitpick on those spots that gave you challenges. How can we fix those challenges? And because your routine's done now. You might add 1 or 2 things here or there, but that structure, your sequences, they are pretty much done. And so now you just, over the next, 3 or 4 months of many competitions, you are now polishing up on all those things. And then once you get to, worlds or your nationals, those practices, in my opinion, like we tried to keep them, whenever we were showing routines, you're not showing these routines 6, 7 times. You're showing it twice. You're going to go warm up for 15 minutes, make sure everything's good. You're going to go show it once. Let's see how it goes. We're going to give you some time to rest for a second, and then you're going to go do it again. But you're not going to touch it no more than 2 or 3 times in that practice, because if you beat it up too much, you're going to beat your body up too much. As a jump rope athlete, we have like 6 or 7 routines. So if we spend 5, if you do your single rope routine 5 times at a practice, you're going to be gassed before you even start your double dutch routine. So we were very structured in the way of saying, let's, over the first couple months, let's build sequences. Now let's bleed these sequences together. Now that we have them, let's polish them up. And now that you polish them up, now we should only be able to run this thing 1, 2, 3 tops. But now let's move on. Let's keep your body fresh.
That makes sense. And so that section of time when you're prepping, like it competition's coming up, the big ones are, is practice only hitting those routines? That's all you're doing when the kids show up?
For the most part, I mean, don't get me wrong, we have speeds. With Hot Dogs, with our facility, we were able to do some gymnastics training, so they were able to kind of fine tune their gymnastics as well. But for the most part, when it got to the bigger competitions towards the ends, the TOCs, the World Jump Ropes, nationals, things like that, it was all about, when you walk in, your mindset is, we are polishing up this routine. That's all we're doing, because we don't want to beat you up. Yes, we're going to practice 3 days out of the week, but you shouldn't be dead by the 3rd day. We still want to keep you fresh. So yeah, it was all about running the routine, giving your body time to relax, and then doing it again so that we can move on and keep producing good routines.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Interesting. Sweet. How did is that the same thing for you, Kaylee?
For the most part, yes. My experience is a little bit different. Like, so Nick's experience that he just mentioned was a large team setting. For me, as at least in more recent years, as I've been jumping, a lot of it has been a mixture between I'll practice with my team when possible, but a lot of it's on my own. Just, me in a gym. So I have a little bit more flexibility, I think, and in the way that I'm doing things. But the structure of the year, I think is the same. Like, I think towards the beginning of the year, I know I'm doing a lot of like creation and trying to get new individual skills and things like that. And then moving into sequences and moving into the full routine. But for me, the challenge is always when I start running the full routine first. It's always endurance, like always. And I think that's the problem for a lot of jumpers is that you can do each sequence pretty flawlessly by itself. But then whenever you start hooking them together, it's a train wreck. And so the way that I have been able to kind of get past that hump, I guess. And it's my dad told me to do this when I was 11 or 12. And I looked at him like he was nuts. I was like, you don't understand how hard this is. And he was like, Kaylee, if you'll just do it, it'll work. And sure enough, I did. But what he told me to do was to run the routine and then take like 3 or 4 deep breaths, like the equivalent of 10 to 12 seconds, and then run it again. And I was like, what?
That's
what does that
intense.
Yeah. And he said that I should do that 3 to 4 times in a row with, 10, 15 seconds in between each time. And again, looked at him like he was crazy. I probably cried because I was 12. But I tried it. And once, in my experience, this will get your endurance up faster than anything else in the whole world will.
Mm-hmm.
And your second time you run the routine, third time you run the routine is going to look horrible. But you get through it and you teach your body, you teach your mind and your body that you can do things that you didn't think you could do when you're that tired. And it just works, right? And so I'll start doing that. I don't even know. I'm not good with time frames, but maybe like 2-3 months out from a major competition. And then once I feel like I have my endurance up to where I can actually perform the whole thing, then is when I really start trying to cut back on the volume, and just walk into the gym, do the routine as many times as I feel like I need to and should, and then get out.
That's an interesting drill because it's brutal, but also because like the goal is not to have a perfect run. It's not even really to complete the skills. It's literally just to stay taxed and to do it in a way that matches your muscle memory, which is very interesting. Although very brutal. How do you maintain training? How do you maintain the training intensity when you're jumping by yourself? Because like I personally have done a lot of jumping solo, and it is extremely difficult for me to maintain the motivation.
Yeah, no, it's super tough. I used to pray real hard before every single practice that I would be able to just get through it because it's tough in all reality, to be motivated. And my brother told me something that has stuck with me. And it's, I can't remember the quote, but it was basically that motivation is a feeling, right? And a feeling is very transient. It's going to go up one day and down the next. And so if your actions are dictated by that feeling of motivation, then you're never going to get anywhere in life or in jump rope. And that's so true. And that's kind of stuck with me. And so what I always have tried to do is, walk into the gym with a plan and just walk in and do something, right? Like have a warm up, have something that gets you moving, whether that's running laps, whether that's doing 100 double unders or whatever it is.
You're saying something mindless that you're not thinking about.
Right. Yeah. And something to just get your body moving, right? Because when you walk into the gym, 9 times out of 10, if you're by yourself, like you actually don't want to do what you're about to ask your body to do.
Yep. Yes.
Like
every time.
Yeah. Maybe it's 10 times out of 10. Like you don't want to go through the physical pain of what you're about to ask your body to do. And so, but once you get your body moving, I think from a mental standpoint, it helps. But then also, from a physiological standpoint, you start to release endorphins because you're being active and your heart rate's up and all these things. And so at that point, it just starts to become a little bit easier to like, all right, now I'm going to ask my body to do my rope manipulation sequence, or I'm going to go into some speed training, but I'm not going to hit it hard for the first run. I'm going to ease myself into it a little bit more. And so that's how I always did it. I was like, maybe I can't force myself to walk into the gym and just hit it, but I can force myself to walk into the gym and knock out a set of 100 double unders to warm up, you know?
Yeah, that makes a big difference. And I think what you're saying about like gauging your expectations is huge, because like when I was at RX and I would train after work, because Dave, the owner, was kind enough to let me use the gym after work hours, and like I would be there by myself jumping, which is cool. And for there was a few months. I mean, a lot of times it was just to jump for fun, but there was a few months, probably a grand total of like 3 to 5, where the focus was actually to get better in a competitive perspective. And whether that was for competition or just for myself to raise my scores, to get better, whatever the intention was, to train seriously. And I found that every single time I planned out a brutal workout for myself, and you better do this and you better be good, or whatever the extreme self-talk was, it didn't work. Like it never worked. And then the times that worked extraordinarily well is, to your point, I would show up and be like, okay, let's just get started. This does not have to be an amazing practice. In fact, there's a high likelihood that I might totally bomb whatever workout I have in front of me right now. But the point is to show up and to get the work done regardless of if it looks good or not. And to accept the fact that this is going to hurt for sure, in both cardiovascular ways, muscular ways, and physically being whipped by the rope. And I think that the times that I approached it that way were just so much better. To your point about setting the expectations correctly,
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a huge point. And anybody who's entering college, or most jumpers that are entering college and still trying to compete, like these are things that are really, really helpful as you enter that world.
I do want to work towards wrapping up a little bit, because I know we've been chatting for over an hour now, and it's been super fun, as expected. What do you guys? How did you view? I'm curious if you've ever had like a moment of transitioning your jump rope environment, or transitioning your jump roping, I guess. And I'm thinking about what you said with college, right? Like, because when you move from high school to college, jump rope tends to change drastically. I'm wondering how you guys handled the transition to college, or if there was a different transition that was equal or greater in effort.
I'm trying to think. I mean, so one, when you transition to college, like, yes, you don't practice as much. I think for me personally, I probably didn't jump at college as much as I could have and should have. But the one thing that kind of kept me like still creating things and stuff like that was, I had the opportunity to work with the Houston Rockets. And so we had jump rope. It was me and Jeff and Katrina. So we had a group over there. So I would see them 2 or 3 nights out of the week. So yes, we were working on a routine for the show that for a game, but at the same time, we were still able to work on our actual routine to like practice and things like that. So for me, I looked forward to those times to be able to go, because just like y'all just talked about, me getting into the gym by myself, like I am the worst. Like I'll go and I'll start jumping around. I'm like, you know what? I am good. And I'll leave in a heartbeat. And so like, it's been, for myself, it's been very hard to just jump in the gym by myself, but I look forward to those times, to being in the gym with other jumpers or just other people in general, and being able to share that and kind of work. Like I've always liked that.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I think for myself, the transition to college, from high school to college, wasn't actually that different or crazy, because I went to LSU, so I stayed in my hometown.
Gotcha. Okay.
My teammates, the teammates that I really jumped with at that point were still in high school. So like nothing changed as much, but the transition from college to grad school, I moved to Florida from Louisiana. And so all of a sudden I really did find myself like I am alone. Like there is no jump roper that I know of in Tampa, Florida. And so I think the way that it worked was I set these big, giant goals for myself, like tricks that I had no business even thinking about getting. I would set the goal, and I would think about that every day, every night. I would think about those goals and visualize those goals coming true, right? And happening, and like what it would feel like, what it would be like. And I think that that's one of the things that helped me to be motivated to get into the gym. And then also setting a schedule. So when you're in college or grad school, your schedule is going to be tight. With like fitting in jump rope is hard, but I think that's one of the reasons why jumpers and other athletes can be such great students, is because it forces you to be a good time manager.
Mm-hmm.
And so being intentional, setting a time, like my goal is to be in the gym by 9 a.m. I have an hour and a half to hit it hard, and then I've got to get to class. You know what I mean? Rather than just being like, oh yeah, I'll get to the gym whenever it's convenient. That's not going to happen. So those are the things that kind of helped, I think.
Yeah. And then one other thing, sorry, I meant to touch on me going from high school to college. I was, within an hour of Houston, so that wasn't that bad. But by the time from like 8th grade on, so basically my whole high school career of jumping, I actually was never really jumping with our team because I was playing football. Jeff was playing football or basketball. And so my teammates, we were never at practice. So the only time that we could practice is when we got together outside of practice to actually get things done. So when I got to college, it was basically the same thing. Yes, we were getting together for a Rockets type of game, but it didn't feel any different from us getting together outside of practice to go work on what we need to work on for either the next show or for the next competition or whatever it was. So that was still kind of normal for me going from high school to college.
That makes a lot of sense. Like you kind of fast tracked the self-reliance piece of things, and you kind of had to take care of it yourself. That makes sense. So I think this has been a really good conversation. I think the majority of what we've talked about I had not planned at all, and I'm super thankful for that because it's been so much fun, you guys. Thank you tremendously for being on again and going really deep into these subjects.
You're
so welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Definitely. I'll definitely let you guys get back to your day. And I'm looking forward to, I'm sure there at some point will be a part 3. Hey, before you go, I just wanted to say one last thing. One of my main goals for this podcast is to share the stories, of other jumpers and provide a full picture about everything that's possible with the jump rope. The more people that hear this, the better. And it would really help me out if you sent this podcast to somebody you know, whether in real life or digitally on Instagram, Facebook, whatever platform you use. It would mean the world to me. So that's it. I hope you have a great rest of your day, night, lunch, evening, whatever time it is for you right now. See you later.